All right, so Stephen session is about paving the way to the pipeline. Topic is pretty natural. It's about automation, but if you prepare any pipeline, you need to do. There are a few things that you need to consider to configure with your load testing suits. So we'll take a Stephen will go through that journey. So he's going to utilize JMeter. I think a lot of people is using JMeter, so it's going to be pretty helpful for everyone. I don't know if you have heard about Stephen Townshend, but if not, I would recommend to reach out to Stephen on LinkedIn. He's pretty active, and he's based in Auckland, New Zealand. He's been working in the performance now since several years. He's been also working with one of our other pack member, which is Dane Shepherd. Sri Valapana is a friend of Stephen. He's been on the pack now the fourth time, and he's doing a pretty awesome YouTube channel which is called Performance Time. So if you want to explore a traditional or all the basics of performance testing, you have to listen to Stephen. It's a pretty awesome channel. And also he's baking soda, so I have to ask things about it because I'm pretty impressed about baking soda. So Stephen,
hello.
Just yay, hey. So Stephen, are you gonna change work or job, or are you starting to be a baker, or are you open a bakery soon?
No. There's I think baking is a lot of work, but not a lot of money potentially. But it's just an interest of mine. I just love the idea of with sourdough. So you don't buy yeast, you create your own starter, which is like a colony of yeast that you grow yourself, and you keep it alive like a pet, and then you use it to bake your bread. It's pretty awesome.
Okay, so next time I'd like to taste it. So next pack, if you're still following us and joining the next physical pack, you have to bring some stuff.
Oh yeah, let's see if I can get it through customs.
Yeah, that would be more complicated. All right, so to respect the schedule, so we have a 5 minutes delay. I'm sorry about it. So Stephen, I pass the ball to you, so you can start presenting and sharing your topic to the rest of the community. So good luck, and I'll get back to you soon with the Q&A session. See you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Henrik. And yeah, thanks. It's awesome to be part of Pack for the fourth time. Thank you, Henrik and Neotys, for having me along so many times. I'm really excited about today. For the next 24 hours, I'm going to try and be online as much as I can. So I guess today, like on the surface, what I'm going to do is demonstrate some tips for using JMeter in a way which facilitate automating your performance test. That's the surface layer. But what I'm actually trying to do is raise this bigger topic of simplification. And for me, that's about asking the question, what am I doing now? And how can I do it more efficiently? And some of the questions that I get raised from that are, how do I do more with less? How do I move faster? And how can I free myself up to do more valuable work? That's where I'm heading today. Before I go any further, I did want to acknowledge two people. So Dave Matheson and Jay Sisley are continuous delivery engineers that I work with at IAG. They also have a background in performance testing, and they have built quite an elaborate performance automation framework. And a lot of the ideas that I'm talking about today come from them and what they've been doing. In fact, I have to acknowledge that what I'm going to show is a rudimentary step on the way to what they've achieved. So I just wanted to call that out. And cheers, guys. I love your work. So I'm going to cover just a few simple things today. One is this idea of a value stream map as a way of analyzing your own process. Then I'm going to focus in on automation of performance testing, and then demonstrate how we might use JMeter in a way which facilitates that. And at the end, I'm going to finish by bringing it back to that bigger picture of simplification. So the first step in simplification is to take the time to understand what are you doing now. So recently I attended a workshop in Sydney as part of my work, a value stream mapping workshop. So what's a value stream map? A value stream map is where you map out a process from an initial need or idea through to when a product is delivered, and all the different stages and tasks in between to get to that point. So that particular workshop was about the delivery lifecycle within IAG, the organization. But I took those ideas back with me to Auckland, and I asked myself, what's my process as in performance testing and analysis? And that's what we're looking at right now. This was my first pass trying to understand my process. So we have these different columns marked by the darker blue rectangles. So each column is a stage in the process. So there's an analysis and planning stage, a development stage, a pre-test task stage, and so on. Underneath that, we have blue and green rectangles, and they represent the tasks that we have to complete in each stage. So, and during analysis and planning, I assess performance risk. I do a workload model. I gather requirements. I would probably add some more things in there now. And the green tasks are the ones which were predominantly manual before I started this process. And the blue tasks were at least partially automated. And finally, there are these purple rectangles down the bottom, and they represent the outputs of each stage. So by the time I'm finished analysis and planning, what do I have? I have some kind of strategy that I can follow and shapes my path forward. At the end of development, what do I have? Some kind of test assets and maybe monitoring assets are ready to go and run. So what's the purpose of all this? Why would you do this? The reason is that you can, once we have this out in front of us, we can look for opportunities to optimize the process. Now, the fastest task is the one that we don't do at all. So if there's a task here that we can completely remove, that's the best one that we can have. But when I first looked at this, I didn't see any opportunity for that straight away. So what else can we do? Well, I can only think of two options really. One is that we simplify a task. We somehow reduce its scope or its complexity. Or we can automate a task. When you automate a task, it doesn't necessarily reduce the elapsed time to complete it, but there are other side effects, such as freeing you up to do more valuable work, or not having to focus on fiddly mechanical tasks which take away all your concentration and burn you out. So when I look at the above, I'm about to focus on automation now. So when I look at my value stream map that I initially put together, where are the tasks which could be automated? And the best definition I have at the moment for what makes a task suitable for automation is that it is mechanical and repeated often. So the area I can see is around test execution, that pre-test, execution, and post-test task stages. So before I drill in on that area, I just wanted to point out, I've got these white arrows at the top, which give some kind of indication about how long each of these stages takes. So where's the time being spent? It's actually not. We're talking execution is in the realm of hours to days, whereas development of test suites, potentially up to 8 weeks, depending on the scope of the engagement. But we can't automate test suite development. So what are we going to do? And that's what I want to talk about at the end. But for now, let's drill in on this idea of automating to simplify our process. So here we've just drilled in on those 3 stages: pre-test, execution, and post-test tasks. And if I try and have a ballpark figure about how long each of these things take, individually, they don't take much time, but collectively, they start to add up. But if you look at it, there are quite a few tasks here that we can't automate. The key thing would be analyzing results and monitoring, doing a deep dive analysis to diagnose an issue, or coordinating multiple teams to solve a problem. I can't automate that. And I've made the executive decision here that I can't monitor a test without having some kind of human input. So if I remove that, what we're left is with this. The other thing that comes to mind is that if I'm going to automate my performance testing process, then that activity of configuring my test suite before I run and then verifying it's all correct before I run, I don't have to do that anymore because I have pre-configured configuration that I'm selecting from. I shouldn't need to do that very much, if at all. So let's say we can effectively remove those two tasks entirely. So what we're left with is about half an hour of time or activity that we stand to save. Doesn't seem like much, but if you're running, this is for every performance test execution. So that could be every day, multiple times a day. It certainly starts to add up. But like I said, it's not just about the elapsed time. It's about freeing yourself up to do more valuable work, not having to focus on those frustrating mechanical tasks which burn you out. But there's a huge opportunity here to enable other people to run performance tests. Because we've created this abstraction layer with our automation, we potentially enable other teams, other people, developers and testers to run performance tests because they no longer need to know how to use a load testing tool because of the framework, the abstraction layer you put in front of it. So when it comes to automation, my own personal experience was that I tried to think about everything and automate it at once in my mind, and that's where I kind of got confused and I didn't make a lot of headway. So what I ended up doing, and what I would recommend from my own experience, is just pick one task and automate it. Then pick another task and automate that, and so on. And eventually you can start joining them together into bigger jobs. So for me, the starting point for me, which I think I've talked about online, was refreshing test data. So I had a particular load test suite where I had to query Oracle and SQL Server databases, get all the data, copy it, transform, I had to reformat it somehow, copy it into different files, maybe put it in another database table. And it was fiddly and annoying work. I had to do it quite often. And if I had to concentrate, because if I made a mistake, I'd stuff up the next test. So all I did was write a PowerShell script to do all that for me. And it was such a relief to just hit a button or run a command and it's just done. Don't have to worry about it. Freed me up to do other things. That was my starting point. Now, eventually, like I said, you can start to build these individual automated tasks into bigger jobs and then some kind of orchestration layer on top. And for me, that was Jenkins. I knew I was heading towards Jenkins as my orchestration layer. And I think that's important because when you're automating these individual tasks, it makes sense to pick a scripting language which your orchestration layer supports. So lucky for me, Jenkins supports PowerShell, so that all worked well. I would also say that when you get to the point that you're building bigger jobs and your orchestration layer, don't put all the onus on yourself to be able to have all the answers and to build this amazing framework. Now, I guarantee your organization will have DevOps engineers or CI/CD engineers that know this stuff. This is bread and butter to them, right? So collaborate with them, utilize them, and you'll probably find that what you can achieve is much bigger than what you would have been able to do by yourself. So this is what it actually looked like at IAG. So this is kind of reality for me. So that test data refresh script, I still run that in isolation by itself. It's still useful, but it's not part of a bigger pipeline yet. However, J&J have included that as part of the pipeline. So there's 3 jobs here that we've built. The first one, it kicks off our server monitoring. Very simple. It just initiates the monitoring of a particular set of servers using a monitoring platform. And that is just a PowerShell utility that we've written that collects perfmon counters because all of our on-prem servers use Windows. And we push that data to an InfluxDB database, which is a time series database, and we can monitor that using Grafana dashboards. So that's nice and simple. The second job is the more chunky, complicated one. So that is the one which runs the test. So that rather than run the test on the Jenkins slave, we get the Jenkins slave to kick off a scheduled task on our load testing platform. And what that does is it goes into version control, or Git in our case, and pulls the latest version of the load test project. And it initiates the test with all the configuration required for that test run. While the test is running, it's actually pushing data into that same InfluxDB database just so we can monitor the test in Grafana. And then at the end of the test, it packages up all the test assets, not just test results, but the configuration we use during the test, all the test data we use during that test, even all the errors that occur during the test. They get put in a NuGet package, which is just a zip file and stored somewhere safely. Third job takes that raw test assets and it processes the raw test results and it pushes them into a database. And that's just so that I can easily analyze the results in Tableau, which I talked about at length at previous hack events. So all this automation, it's not easy, but it's totally doable. As performance engineers, I think the most challenging bit is to change the way that we use our load testing tools to support this automation being built around it. And the most important thing is to be able to pass in all the configuration required for the test that you want to run. And through trial and error, as far as I'm concerned, there's 4 categories of configuration. There's the duration. How long do you want to run the test? That's the simple one. There's the workload. That's everything from which user or thread groups to run, how many threads or users, or the concurrency, the pacing, which is the throughput, the think time as well. All of that is in my workload config. Environment config, endpoint, subscription keys, everything about the environment that I want to test against. And the controller agent config, this is everything I need to know about the test platform I'm going to run my test from. That could be anything from where JMeter is installed or your load test tools installed to the details of a proxy server if you need one. How you achieve that completely depends on the tool that you're using, and each will have their own challenges. Today in this demonstration, I'm going to use JMeter as the example because that's what I use, and I know lots of you use it. But hopefully, if you use another tool, the same principles could be applied. So I'm about to kick into my demo, and I'm going to cover just 6 things. The first one is utilizing the power of properties files and rethinking about your JMeter project like a code solution. The next one is using the flexible file writer to have an easier way to customize your results output. Separating out your script files into their own independent source files. Dynamically generating a run ID. Enhancing the primitive data pool functionality within JMeter using the simple table server. And then handling reusable components in your test suites better using test fragments. So let's kick into the demo. Oops, wrong thing. So this is a rudimentary JMeter solution. See, in the past, what I'd have is a JMX file and some CSV files in a folder, or maybe the CSVs are on a different. That's pretty much where I used to be a few years ago, right? And that's fine, it does the trick, but there's some benefits to doing this. And the key is this PowerShell script. So what this PowerShell script is going to do is it's going to start JMeter, or my test, and pass in all the configuration required to define the test that I want to run. And that's the key thing, and I'll show you in a second. And then I have these different folders. So in the configuration folder, I have these properties files. So anyway, if you've used JMeter much before, you'll know there's a file called jmeter.properties or system.properties or user.properties. These files contain all the configuration to define how you want JMeter configured. But the power of JMeter is that you can define your own properties files with any property you like. And that's what we're utilizing here. And you'll see that I talked about those 4 categories: controller, duration, environment, and workload. And that's how I've split up my configuration here. And it's a combination of 4 of these properties files, which are just going to define the test that I want to run. JMeter projects contains my JMX file. I'm actually not using the results or test data folders. And in scripts, I've got some groovy files. So half the time when I'm working now, I'm actually working in Visual Studio Code, which is what you're looking at now, which is a free-to-use IDE. And you can see here what we saw in the file system is the same structure we see here. Here is the execute test PowerShell script. And without going into details, and this is very rudimentary, just to give you the idea. I know this is bad. I've got my configuration of my code. Yeah, the actual framework doesn't do this. It's all separate. But what I'm doing here is I'm selecting 4 different properties files, 1 environment, 1 controller, 1 duration, and 1 workload. And I'm selecting those, and I'm going to invoke JMeter, passing in those properties files. That will define the test I'm going to run. So if I hide this, if I execute that PowerShell script, it's going to open JMeter and my project, and it has loaded in all the properties that I want to use for the test. Now this is the property display, and this is pretty cool. So I'll show you what a properties file looks like. It's just key value pairs. Here I've got think time min and think time max in milliseconds, which are 2 properties that I'm passing in. And if you use the property display, you can actually see the value of the properties that were passed in during runtime. So here we can see think time min and think time max. They're here. We can see the values. We can confirm they got passed in correctly. So that's really cool. I only just found out about that, so that's awesome. The other thing to keep in mind is that properties are not the same as JMeter variables. You can't just reference them the same way. So that's where I've got these user-defined variables. So I've got 4 of them. Once again, controller, environment, workload, duration. And what I do here is I read in the value of the property using the p function, and I set a JMeter variable with the same name. And this is the thing. Or if I go to, say, thread count, this is the variable I use in my thread group, thread count, and I reference it that way. So that's the whole thing, was the first tip around passing in properties files, how powerful that is. And you can see with that PowerShell script how it would be easy to extend that or use that in your Jenkins pipeline quite easily, right? So that's the first thing, and probably the most key thing. The second tip is the flexible file writer. So this is a way, so by default, if you want to write out all the raw results of a JMeter test, there's the JTL output. It's just a text file or CSV which contains all the measurements you want, and you can customize that any way you want. But it is a little bit fiddly having to go into JMeter.properties and change different things. The flexible file writer makes this much, much simpler. Here you can simply in the UI define, in this case I'm defining the headers, the columns I want, and the values. So the key thing here is you can pass in, you can output as part of every sample the value of any variable you want. So here the variable I'm passing in is the run ID alongside all the other standard information. Talk a little bit more about that in the future. So the flexible file writer is a plugin. You can get it using the plugin manager or just Google it online, and it's highly recommended. Nice and simple to use. The third tip, and just before I go any further, this whole scenario that I've got, this test suite, all it does is we go back to the start, it's simulating this Blaze demo website. So BlazeMeter do lots of good stuff for the JMeter community. They've got this demo website where you book a flight and you just pick some departure, destination, you find flights, you choose a flight, enter your customer information, you hit purchase, and that's it. So there's just 4 requests, 4 user actions, and that's what I've covered in my test suite. And here's my flight booker thread group. There is a home page, we find the flights, we select the flights, and then we purchase a flight, and that's all there is to it. So in this transaction, this sampler here, I've got 2 pre-processes, so they execute before the request is made. And normally what I used to do is I'd write some groovy code in here. There's nothing wrong with that, it works fine. But instead what I'm doing here is I'm referencing a groovy file in my solution. And there's 3 reasons that I do that. First one is this code editor is awful, especially if you're running really like a lot of lines of code. Even just the scroll bar and missing things at the bottom, it's not the best thing to work with. So if you have separate groovy source files, you can edit them in your IDE like this. Much simpler, much easier to read, much easier to work with. That's one reason. The second one is that I did find that when you have a JMX file with embedded Groovy and Bean Shell code, and you check it into version control, it can corrupt your JMX project. It can introduce weird characters and things, problems can occur, which you can work around. But the simplest way is just to separate out all your Groovy and Bean Shell code as separate files and just reference them. Nice and easy. And the third reason is that, say this Groovy code, which picks a random from port, what if I wanted to use it in 15 different preprocessors? Rather than copying and pasting the same code 15 times, you can just reference the same Groovy file from all those different places, which is just efficient and easy to use. The fourth tip is dynamic run ID. So whenever I run a performance test, I keep a test log. And that says, what's the test, what time did I run the test, what was the purpose, what was the details of the test I ran, and what was the outcome, what did I find? And every single test run has a unique run ID. And I used to define those manually, which is fine, it does the job, but you can run into problems and it's frustrating. The most common problem I run into is I forget to update the run ID, I run a test again, and I overwrite my old test results, and that's fun for anyone. So now I just dynamically generate a run ID every time, nice and simple. So here we have in our flexible file writer, we're actually naming the results file based on the run ID, and we're also outputting it in every sample. So how am I doing that? In my environment config here, I'm defining this thing called abbreviated environment. PP short for preprod. If I was going to use the systest environment, for example, I might call it ST. It's just an identifier, right? What I'm doing in JMeter is saying, name it BD short for Blaze Demo, underscore the abbreviated environment name, underscore the date and time. So what happens? If I run that back, play that back now, and I look at the results B, hopefully it works fine. Yeah, it did. Whew. Live demo is scary stuff. If I go to the results folder, just pretend we didn't see that one, you'll see that it's named, I've named the results file based on the run ID, BD underscore. The date and time that I started the test. If I look inside here, it's just a CSV file. I now have a run ID column, and the run ID is included with every sample. Why do I do that? It's because I take this data and I push it into a database, which is what I analyze in Tableau, and I need a way to be able to differentiate different test runs and compare them against each other. That's why I do it. So that is a dynamic run ID. I highly recommend it. What we actually do with our automation suites is we pass in the Jenkins build number. And other reasons, and I'm looking to add like a description which contains that information that I just showed you instead. But I highly recommend it. The second to last tip is that the CSV dataset config that comes with JMeter is hugely limited for a number of reasons. You can't even pick random data from a CSV file, which is a real pain, let alone consumable data. So I work in insurance. A classic use case for me would be I have a bunch of quote numbers, insurance quotes. I take one of them and I turn it into an insurance policy. And when the policy exists, the quote it doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. I can't reuse that number. So I need to consume that quote number or get rid of it, right? So the simple table server is a plugin for JMeter, which gives you all of that ability to add consumable data, random access, add and remove records on the fly. It's pretty good, right? So when I started JMeter, because I've configured the simple table server, it actually kicked off this thing called the simple table server on port 9191. And it's just a web server that runs and it listens out for requests. So in my JMeter project, in my setup thread group, I am calling it once to initialize a data pool. So I call, just like you would any other request, I call the simple table server, I call the init file method function, and I say, please load this CSV file into memory, which is what it does. And further down, I say, please read a row of data from that file, and from this file here, read a random record and keep the data, don't consume it. And there are a bunch of options there. So when I played it back, when I initialized, it said, yep, I read one record into memory. And when I made the read request, it gave me a row of data. That's all it did. So because it's just like any other request, so how do we get these values and turn them into variables? We have to do correlation like you would any other request. So if we look at the read here, I've got a whole bunch of regular expression extractors. You could do this as one with different capture groups. I split it out to give them meaningful names like address. And I use all these correlated variables in the purchase here. So that's the simple table server. Highly recommend it. It's very powerful. One thing I would say is if you have multiple people working on the same VM or server at the same time, or even at different times, you can run into trouble because the simple table server is tied to an instance of JMeter. And if you're all trying to open copies of JMeter and it's trying to start the server on the same port, you're going to run into problems. So I've taken this a step further, and I've re-implemented the functionality of the simple table server as a standalone Node.js application. I'm really excited by that. I think there's lots of potential, and I want to extend it and see where that takes me. Okay, the last tip. The last tip is this idea of a test fragment. So actually, this concept I got first introduced to in an early version of Neoload with the idea of the shared container. And so you can do the same kind of thing in JMeter. So a test fragment, I've used think time as the example. Here's my think time. I have a flow control action. I have a constant timer. I'm randomizing the think time based on two enough upper and lower bounds. What I used to do in the old days was copy and paste this think time transaction all over my test suite, which is fine. It works. But what happens if I want to change the logic of the think time? I have to go back through all these different transactions and update it. And that's not great. It's not ideal. So with the test fragment, you create it once here, and then you reference it multiple times using a module controller, which is what I've done 3 times here. So if I modify this transaction within this test fragment, then all these module controllers will reference that automatically. Nice and simple. So the other classic example would be if you had a home page or a login or a particular search, which all of your a lot of different thread groups in this case use, then you could make those test fragments as well. Very cool stuff. So that is the demonstration that I wanted to show. Just going to present this again. About the notes. Screen. So I introduced some ideas and how we might analyze our own process. And then I went into JMeter and showed you some tips on how to use it. So where's all this going and what am I talking about? So I think it's really important as performance engineers that we take the time to analyze our own process. So don't look at my value stream map, make your own. Figure out what is it that you uniquely do in your process or your team does in your process. Maybe work together. Lay it all out. And then once you have that information, you can use it to optimize your process. That's the starting point. The next thing is, in automation, it's not just about reducing the elapsed time. In fact, you might not save any time at all, but you free yourself up to do more valuable work. You prevent yourself having to do that frustrating, fiddly, concentrated work, which you have to do over and over. And you potentially, by automating, because of that extra layer of abstraction, you enable and empower other teams to run performance tests for themselves. Sure, they might not be able to do proper analysis of results and diagnosis, but they should at least be able to see if there's a major problem or not. Do they run a test? Well, my recommendation is when you are automating, start small and build it up. Don't try and solve all the world's problems in one go. And the most important thing, I think, is to start changing the way you use your load testing tools now to prepare yourself for automation. In fact, when you think about it, even if you never plan on automating your test suites, some of the things that I talked about today, which is just the tip of the iceberg, will simplify your load testing assets and make your life easier. So I can't recommend that strongly enough. So let's go back to the bigger picture here. What we did just now is we potentially saved ourselves from focusing on tasks for half an hour per test execution. But what about that potential 8 weeks of test suite development that for a large engagement I might have to deal with? I can't automate that. So what am I going to do? And I think one of the things happening at the moment is there's this, we move to, as companies are adopting DevOps and continuous delivery, they say automate, 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 and that is the answer to everything. But it's not the answer here. So what are we going to do? And I think the idea that automation is just a subset of a bigger thing called simplification. So how could we simplify test suite development? Here's some ideas to get us started. And my colleague Phil is going to talk about this really shortly. Utilizing UI automation. So he's talking about a framework, an automated performance testing framework. Part of that is leveraging UI automation or Selenium WebDriver as a way of generating a load. which used to be a crazy idea, but it actually doesn't, actually works pretty well now. And there are lots of benefits to that. One is that the test assets tend to be simpler and easier to maintain. And often in his particular case, the delivery teams, the testers and developers, they know how to use WebDriver. They know how to code and use it, so they can maintain their own performance testing assets. And that's fantastic. That's exactly what we're looking for. Other tips would be focusing more on APIs. So I'm not saying remove all of your end-to-end performance testing. We still need it, but you might be able to reduce the scope and complexity of it by doing more on the API space. In fact, and it's not a sexy thing to talk about, but just generally reducing the scope of our test suites. If you have a test suite which has 30 end-to-end scenarios, I would say, why? If you can reduce that down to 10 scenarios and cover 90% of the risk, I'd say it's probably worth it. Otherwise, we're going to spend all our time in this test suite development and maintenance, and we're getting nowhere, adding no value. If you are a decision maker or an influencer in your organization, only buy, build, or implement testable software. If there's a key software application in your organization which has massively complex bespoke network protocols that no one can capture, the UI is full of dynamic IDs which constantly change, you're just setting yourself up for failure, and it's going to be impossible to effectively implement performance engineering. And it's not part of test suite development, but APM has a big place in simplification within performance engineering, because it allows us to easily identify performance issues without even running performance tests. Both during development, during early testing, helps us with performance testing and in production. So that is all that I wanted to talk about today. That is my topic. Pretty keen to see what questions you have, Henrik, and others. And yeah.
All right. Pretty awesome. I have plenty of questions, in fact. So let me, I see that we have several PAC members. I'm going to enable their webcam so we can have this great Q&A session together. So I will start because I'd like to start.
Yeah.
I noted down a couple of first, you mentioned monitoring. So it seems that you're mainly collecting performance counters. And at the end, you mentioned EPM. Do you have any process or anything that you could be useful that you could share to, Alejandro Melendez at the PAC 70 mentioned about logging every function start time to figure out where you're spending time. Because when something is bad and it's related to code, Perfmon or any performance counters won't give you much details and help to resolve the performance issue. So are you also doing any process to include that part as well?
Like, honestly, not really. It depends. So there are different applications and technologies that I work with. And so one of the areas I work quite heavily in is the Microsoft Azure. And in that space, it's pretty good because even without the developers doing anything or me outputting any extra information, I can collect logs from every component within the stack right back to the database all the way through to the gateway. And I can correlate that quite easy back to my test results. But I'm not, at the moment, that's the next step. Starting to output additional information from our performance test, which we can then feed into our APM. But if I'm an honest assessment is that we are, as our performance team, we don't have a lot of access to APM yet. That's on the cards for this next coming year. So we know we need it, but we're not quite yet at a mature level at all in the APM space.
Also, I noted down that you have a flex writer, means your diameter is writing down into files.
Yeah.
So then I guess you have a process that takes this data and write it down back to the InfluxDB. So yep. You don't push it lively. It's like after the test, you're pushing everything, or do you have a live reporting as well?
There's two parts to it. So The influx, that there is a live stream of data going to InfluxDB, and that's what we use to monitor the test as it goes. And that's aggregated data, right? Then at the end of the test, because for one performance test of one of our big applications, I might have, a gig or more of test data, right? So, and so that's why we process it at the end, because it's got every individual sample and all the information around it. And so that's just a separate PowerShell process, which actually puts it into SQL Server. So that detailed analysis we do in SQL Server and the monitoring we do in Influx and Grafana.
Okay. In fact, I had another question related to that. So I saw that you're using text reader, a simple table, all the regular expressions, a lot of things that the controller of your JMeter controller is doing to run the test and process and handle all the context of the execution. So it seems that you're using Jenkins to do so. So I don't know if you're spinning up containers with the JMeter image in that, and then you delegate the execution to the controller. But I was it said, okay, so if we do a 200 user test with a few load meters, that's fine. If you do 1,000, okay. But what's going to happen when you start pushing the limit a bit more? Won't you have any I/O issues while you execute the test related to all those things that your JMeter has to handle?
Well, the short answer is not really. It has quite a low footprint. So obviously, best practice, you should be monitoring your test platform when you run a test. It's just like it's just one of your systems on a test, right? So you keep an eye on it, make sure it's not overloaded. But I'm running sometimes thousands of threads at once on a single VM, because we're running on VMs at the moment for our on-prem testing, and without any problem whatsoever. It's just flying through it. It's only, the only real situation where I run into hardware bottlenecks is if I'm running a UI-based test. If I'm spinning up, I can spin up maybe 30 headless browsers on one big chunk of server, and that's about the best I can do.
Yeah, that's the limitation of more of the technology as far as respect. Yeah, but it's got the point. Okay, so you mentioned at the end, so that will be my last question, and then I will the other pack members, and I don't see any Q&A questions so far from the audience. But my last topic is you said first analyze your workflow, identify your task from your value stream management to bring your own value stream, and I think that's a good point. But I was wondering, because a lot of things that you've done in your framework, I already done it as well from perspective and pipeline, and so I think that we have lots of common steps, even if the content of the step is really context driven, because the way I'm going to generate the data, the way I'm going to extract the properties, blah, 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 and so on and so forth, a little bit different. But then I think that there are common step within the workflow automation that could be shared to the community. Say, first, if you want to automate, you should go consider this task, exactly as you described at the beginning of the session. Because even if it's everyone has different value stream, but when you start to do purely the load test, I think there is a lot of common tasks.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Well, I think there's something about taking the time without having anyone telling you what it will look like, to think about it for yourself or as a team and say, what is it that we do? You learn something about yourself, right? Even if it ends up with the exact same model which everyone else uses. So maybe the step would be have a go yourself first, and then maybe we could put some kind of template framework out there which other people could refer to. But have a go first before you look at it. Maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah. And I think you make the point. I mean, you took the example of JMeter, but for those who's not using JMeter, who's using a load runner or Six Performer or Neoload, you can do exactly what Stephane has just presented. So don't block yourself because you're using a tool. Any automation or any process that you want to implement within your project could be possible.
Yeah.
All right, so that was my last questions and notes. Shrivali, what about you? I mean, I've seen that you've been connected since the beginning, so thanks. And I see that you have an awesome T-shirt, so thanks for wearing it.
Yeah, that was my first comment. Like, Steven, how could you get the T-shirt wrong? We were supposed to go to the future, not to the space. Like,
I don't think that UPS don't have a DeLorean, and they didn't manage to get the delivery in on time. So they need to
So
look at it.
is it a message to the post office of New Zealand, or?
Yeah, it's a message to them.
So, yeah, I do have a couple of questions. So yeah, thank you for actually sharing your journey through, And so what are the next steps for you? Where are you going? Where are you planning to go? What's the ultimate destination for you in this automation journey?
Well, it's basically aligning with where our company's going, and that's all heading towards containerization and cloud. So the next step is for me is to take this framework and then bring it to the cloud and bring it containerization into the fray. So that data pool manager that I've built in Node.js, for example, I want to make that a container image that we can just spin up on the fly, mount data into it, and use it, and so on. JMeter want to run in containers as well, and then build the right automated monitoring and logging into the cloud as well. That's probably the next step for me. Yeah.
And anything in the area of like automated workload modeling and things like that? Are you looking in that space?
I hadn't thought of that. What a nice idea. Yeah.
And and I have like one more kind of question / comment. You have touched upon using UI automation for performance testing, which I think it has a lot of potential, and I personally agree with the approach, but there are some side effects which I'm like really worried about. Like for instance, sometimes when some businesses, if they are looking for a performance tester, they are not looking for performance tester because they have performance testing need. They are looking for performance tester because they don't have people who know how to operate JMeter or Neoload or performance testing tool. Now, when we start using Selenium scripts, they might bring in, Selenium experts, and they expect them to do performance testing. And I'm really scared about the direction that it might head into. So what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, it's common sense, right? I mean, we're using WebDriver, but we still need a load testing tool to wrap around it. And so what? You can run an automation script. Performance, the expertise is in being able to run the right test, analyze the results, and get meaning out of it, and actually improve the performance and the.
I know that's so big.
It goes on forever. Yeah. I'm not too worried about it myself. I mean, you can't just use WebDriver by itself to run your performance tests.
No, I'm not saying that. No, it's just that people don't. I'm not worried that someone is just going to take my job. I'm just worried that people may not realize that, okay, building script is just one part. So if you have someone who knows how to build automation scripts, doesn't necessarily mean they will be able to do end-to-end performance testing effectively. So that's what my concern is.
Yeah, I think it used to be the performance engineers. I mean, performance tester used to be scripting experts a few years ago. So when you were saying I'm a performance tester, say, so you know how to script. But then, that's true. People I need someone has been doing load runner for over 5 years. It doesn't tell you if the person is expert enough to analyze, understand, prepare any scripts that will create the data pool, whatever. So I think it's the tool doesn't make the job. It's the methods and they make the point. I agree.
My worry is actually that we have such a focus now on automation and process automation and using pipelines that's being seen as the skill set that we need. But actually, we're lacking the real skill in being able to understand performance and find performance issues and resolve them. And that's the core skill set, right? But now it seems like automation is taking over. But I'm not interested if you can use Jenkins and script well as well. I want to know, can you help an organization? Actually add value. Yeah. And that's
I think it's being able to build GUI scripts and automate. It's part of one of the tasks. but it's not your daily skills that you should have. I think you make
It's
the
like,
point.
that's what you need to get to the start line, and then you start doing your job. That's what I think.
Yeah, or you don't. I mean, I think you were the one 2 years ago, or I don't remember. I don't. To everyone who wants to automate, but does it make sense to start automate if you're not doing at least your test correctly? So, so I think even you said to start automating. I think before starting any automation, make sure you test properly.
Yeah, no point in automating bad performance tests.
Yeah. I also like the point that about simplification, because just because we can automate doesn't mean we necessarily have to do it. So yeah, maybe there are some things which we don't need to do at all. So yeah. Yeah, that's all I have, Henrik, from my end. It's a pretty interesting talk, Stein. Thank you, Stephane.
Yeah,
I
thanks,
did want to
Stephane.
add one thing that I didn't mention is that I am not an expert at all in any of this stuff. Performance, yes. Going to pipeline and automation, no. The point is really like I just wanted to show that I'm trying to do this stuff, and here's how I'm trying to tackle that concept in my mind and deal with it in a practical way.
I think just last note, because first thanks, Stephane, because I think it was a pretty great topic, and you started the conference pretty well. So bravo, congratulations. No, so I think playing with configuration file instead of building through GUI scripts within JMeter, I think it's makes sense. You didn't note that, or maybe I didn't pay attention, but having separate stuff which is stored in your source control makes sense, because you can track the changes, and you can change the test context execution easily with the help of scripts. So I think that makes sense. So the tool is something, but try to customize the context from the outside of the tool. It makes your automation more robust and smarter for when you start to deliver pipeline testing or test fluid technique. Yeah. All right. So thanks. I think we are pretty in good shape. So we are. It's 6. We have 4 minutes before Srivali's presentation. I will take advantage of those 3 minutes to just grab some coffee. So let me just make the coffee break pose, and we're back soon with Srivali, and you will see. So stay tuned with Srivali's talk. I think Stephane is a big fan of Tableau, and is a lot of raw data, Stein as well. And you see, I discovered through Srivali a tool, and so stay tuned, because you will if you don't want to use Tableau, Srivali has a solution. So let's grab a coffee, and we be continuing our pack in a few minutes.